bill here maybe once they get done with this. But there's some people saying, it's very hard to do reconciliation. They think that those chances are pretty scant. And Republicans feel as though they have to have a big legislative win this calendar year going into the midterms. They can talk about the one big beautiful bill all they want and no taxes on tips and all that, but that's a problem. And so you have this clash between the House and Senate a little bit here. You have this clash over what they want to have in the bill. And you also have this clash about speed, saying, okay, if we get off onto these other tangents here, that's going to inhibit our ability to pass the bill. So there's interest by the Republican leadership to keep this pretty lean. And I'm going to take one of these questions here in just a second, but there was a very poignant moment last week when I ran into Jody Arrington. He is a Republican from Texas, and he's the chairman of the House Budget Committee, and he was walking outside, and myself and a photographer and a couple of the reporters just followed him outside the Capitol, walking from the House side to the Senate side, talking to him about budget reconciliation. And we got over toward the Senate, and I said, is there something we should read into the fact that you're walking from the House side to the Senate side? And he said, well, yes, I'm coming over here to meet with some of my Senate Republican colleagues about this, so hopefully they can get on the same page and pass this bill. So let's see where this is going to go. But right now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some of these questions. Here's the first one. If this unilateral approach succeeds, does it signal the end of bipartisan appropriations for major departments like DHS in the future? That is a very good question and a very deep question, because what they're dealing with here is they're taking appropriations, which are the annual 12 spending bills, which they use to fund the government, and saying, okay, we're not going to do the regular thing anymore. We're going to do it via reconciliation. And when you talk to appropriators on both sides of the building, in both the House and Senate, they're not too hep about this idea of doing reconciliation. They realize the nature of the crisis that they're dealing with, but they're like, hey, this is taking away our power. Appropriators, members of Congress who are appropriators, those who serve on the Appropriations Committee, which spends the money, they are a very special breed. It is said that there are three types of members of Congress. There are Democrats, there are Republicans, and then there are appropriators. And so if this takes away the ability to spend money in the customary way that's laid out in the Constitution, the way that Congress has historically done that, yes, that might undercut this. I should say that the appropriations process in Congress has been broken for some time now. This is partly why we had the government shutdown that went government-wide for 43 days in the fall. It's why we had a miniature shutdown for just a few days in the winter, and then why DHS has been unfunded really since February. So, that speaks to the broken nature of the appropriations process, and people are going to start to say, well, why don't we just do it this way all the time now if it's just easier? And then you don't get any Democratic buy-in. Now, I should say this, that Democrats, when they passed Obamacare back in 2009, 2010, they did put a little bit of appropriations money for Obamacare in their reconciliation bill to pass Obamacare. And, you hear some of these stories about that there is some funding for ICE in particular at the Department of Homeland Security from the one big beautiful bill. Well, that was appropriations money through 2029 that Republicans stuffed into that piece of legislation last year. So, again, you might be seeing a change here if they can never get together, and the fact that we've been through these bad government shutdowns over the past year. So that's a significant issue. Here's another question coming in as well here. If this plan proceeds under Senator Graham, and he's the chairman of the Budget Committee, Lindsey Graham of South Carolina, if this plan proceeds under Senator Graham, should we expect political pushback and further division within this already strained budget environment? Yes, probably so. On the main, first of all, you're going to have Republicans saying, well, why isn't my thing in the bill if they keep this pretty lean? And number two, just what we were addressing there about the appropriations question. This is where Graham and maybe some others might try to promise a second reconciliation bill. But I'm telling you, if they're going to get this done by June 1st, this is going to be monumental to get this done. It is a lengthy process where you have to create a budget resolution. You have what you call a vote-a-rama in the Senate. What's a vote-a-rama? That's where they open up a wide open amendment process, and it usually goes anywhere from 9 to maybe as many as 24, 26 hours in the Senate, and they vote and they vote and they vote. And then once you've done that, then the House has to sync up and get the same resolution, but you've not passed the bill. Then you do the bill itself, and you go through the same process, this vote-a-rama as well. And so you have to probably go through 2 vote-a-ramas just to get this done. And yeah, this gets to be pretty toxic, and it takes a while. The one reason why Republicans want to move with dispatch is that the Trump administration, as you might have heard, said, okay, we're just going to bypass Congress, and some people question the constitutionality of this. We're going to pay people at DHS out of some other funds without Congress being involved. Okay, well, the last time they can do that, even though that's pushing the limits of the Constitution, that last pay period, that last paycheck that can go out would come this coming Friday. So they have to move with dispatch on that. Here's another question. While a reconciliation push might accelerate the process, what are the long-term implications for bipartisan cooperation and the stability of DHS funding? Well, you know, it used to be that the what they call the Labor H bill, Labor, Health and Human Services, was almost always one of the toughest bills to pass among the 12 appropriations bills. The easy ones were usually legislative branch for the Congress, something called MILCON VA, military construction and the VA. And then this past fall, you might remember when they opened up the government, they passed 3. The third one was agriculture. Not sometimes that's the easiest, but Labor H, Labor, Health and Human Services, was always very tough, always very controversial because of abortion-related language. Some people thought it was going to be very complicated this year because you might have programs that deal with abortion, certainly, in the post-Mississippi case from the Supreme Court, but also questions about vaccines. That was going to be something in the way the Department of Health and Human Services is handling various infectious diseases and the reaction to the pandemic and all that. Well, I think what has happened now is that the Department of Homeland Security funding bill has far exceeded any controversy with the Labor H funding bill. It was pretty controversial to start with. There was almost a miniature shutdown some years ago under President Obama where they had funded 11 of the 12 annual appropriations bills, but left out DHS because there was a question about the border. And so they had an interim bill just to keep it open for a short period of time, 4 weeks, 5 weeks or something like that. So it was already edging in that direction. And so, yes, I mean, this is part and parcel of why Congress can't, do the appropriations bills. We are still trying to fund fiscal year 2026, which started on October 1st last year. It is now mid to late April, and they're already starting the funding round for fiscal year 2027, which will start October 1st, and they're still dealing with this. So yes, absolutely, that's a case in point with this. So let's go to the next question. If this doesn't pass, what are the next steps? Well, I don't really know what else they could possibly do. Reconciliation, and let me just give you a little bit of a history here with reconciliation. Reconciliation comes out of the Budget Act of 1974. There was a reaction by Congress to, start to reclaim some of their powers under the Constitution because they thought that President Nixon had abused them on a number of fronts, including spending. And, what President Nixon would not do is there's something called impoundment, where Congress would appropriate money and then Nixon would not spend it. And so they created this budget process, which is technically separate from the appropriations process. I know this gets kind of complex here. They created this appropriations process, or the budget process, I should say, so they could keep better track of what money was being spent and everything else.